Christa Pike remains one of the most closely watched names in Tennessee criminal history. In 2026, state authorities set an execution date that would mark the first time in over 2 centuries a woman is put to death in Tennessee. She is the only woman currently on Tennessee's death row. The case began at a Job Corps center in Knoxville in January 1995. Pike was 18. Her classmate, 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer, was a Job Corps student with plans for training and work. On a winter evening, 4 students left the dormitory together, only 3 returned. That dorm sign-out became the first hard clue for investigators. Within about 36 hours, local police had identified the 3 who returned and taken them into custody. Evidence recovered and statements gathered shifted the investigation from confusion to certainty. Pike was charged, tried, and convicted in 1996. The verdict and the sentence that followed set off decades of appeals, legal debate, and public discussion about youth, mental health, and the scope of punishment. This case is not only about a single crime. It raises questions about how we treat troubled youth, how the justice system responds, and how families live with a loss that never ends. Subscribe now if you want clear, factual coverage of cases that shape public policy. Subscribe now, don't miss the courtroom details and legal developments still unfolding. If you think this matters, hit subscribe and be part of the conversation. If you choose not to subscribe, explain why in the comments. Your voice matters here. Subscribe now, follow every document, every filing, every ruling as this case moves forward. Christa Pike was born on March 10, 1976, in Beckley, West Virginia. Her early years were unstable. Her parents separated and reunited repeatedly. Family records and reporting describe frequent neglect and household chaos during her childhood. Her paternal grandmother provided the primary, consistent care for much of Christa's early life, and Pike later said that grandmother was the one person who showed her steady affection. When Christa was 12, her grandmother died. That loss marked a turning point. Medical and legal records note early psychiatric intervention. By elementary school, Christa had experienced a serious self-harm episode and received treatment. Throughout adolescence, she cycled through multiple living arrangements, schools, and short stays in juvenile services. These interruptions affected her school performance and social stability. Accounts from family and court filings describe a turbulent teen period. There are recorded incidents of violence at home and clashes with caregivers. Pike's history includes substance use beginning in her early teens and at least one juvenile placement where she completed educational components and learned about government vocational programs. These records show a pattern of trauma, instability, and missed opportunities for sustained care. Professionals later assessing Pike for court relied on a mix of clinical notes and anecdotal history, repeated childhood losses, documented psychiatric treatment, and later diagnoses that her legal team would cite as central to their mitigation arguments. Those mental health claims, including diagnoses disclosed in advocacy and court filings, became a major strand in her defense across appeals. The other central figure in this story, 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer, arrived at Job Corps with practical goals. Local reporting and court summaries describe Slemmer as a young woman focused on training and future work. She was living in the program dormitory and attending classes on the Knoxville campus. Family statements and later coverage emphasize she had plans and people who cared for her, details that became important to the community response after her disappearance. This chapter of the record establishes 2 different starting points: one young woman shaped by repeated instability and institutional contacts, another young woman pursuing training and a pathway forward. Those divergent backgrounds are central to understanding the events that followed and the legal arguments that would be raised for years to come. Subscribe now if you care about full, accurate coverage of the facts that shape justice. Subscribe now, don't miss the court filings and documents we track closely. If you think this matters, hit subscribe. Every update matters to the people affected. If you won't subscribe, tell us why in the comments and explain what would change your mind. Subscribe now, stay informed, because silence lets important questions go unanswered. In late 1994 and into early January 1995, the environment at the Job Corps campus shifted in ways classmates would later describe as notable and unsettling. Christa Pike, who had enrolled months earlier, formed a close relationship with a fellow student, Tatteralship. The 2 spent increasing time together. Peers remembered them as a pair whose mood and behavior changed noticeably from week to week. Several students reported that Pike grew more withdrawn and more volatile in the weeks before the incident. According to contemporaneous statements and court records, Pike developed strong suspicions that another student, Colleen Slemmer, was interfering in her relationship with Shipp. These suspicions intensified into frequent arguments and verbal confrontations in common areas and between classes. Classmates recalled Pike making repeated comments that she felt threatened and angry. Those remarks, when reported to staff or peers, were treated as warnings in retrospect, though at the time they did not prompt formal disciplinary action. Around the same period, Pike and Shipp showed increased interest in occult themes and symbols, a detail that surfaced in witness testimony and later in trial filings. The pair's conversations and private behavior drew concern from other students, but again, no institutional response halted the pattern. Pike also recruited a third student, Shadala Peterson, to the circle. Peterson's role, as later described in police statements and court testimony, was initially framed as a companion or lookout. Peterson would later cooperate with prosecutors, but in the days before the crime she appeared to be present for several tense interactions and overheard confrontations. Staff logs and peer accounts indicate a sequence of escalating encounters during the days before the offense, sharp words in dorm common rooms, a growing sense of isolation around Pike, and a steady narrowing of her social contacts to primarily Shipp and Peterson. Several students later told investigators they heard Pike make threats or boastful remarks about confronting Slemmer. Those reports became part of the body of witness evidence used by prosecutors. These final weeks paint a picture of mounting tension, personal conflicts, group dynamics, and repeated warnings that, in hindsight, signaled danger. The pattern was visible to classmates and neighbors, it simply did not get interrupted in time. Subscribe now, if you follow cases for the sake of victims and facts. Join us so this voice is heard. Subscribe now, don't miss the courtroom records and filings we unpack next. If you won't subscribe, leave a comment explaining why. Your reasons matter here. January 12, 1995, an ordinary winter night on a training campus. That evening, Christa Pike approached Colleen Slemmer in the dormitory with an offer, a talk and a small gesture toward peace. The two left together with Tatterall Shipp and Shadala Peterson and walked toward an isolated area near the campus grounds. The plan, as it later emerged in testimony, was presented to Colleen as an attempt to resolve the tension. Pike spoke in a way that lowered Colleen's guard. She offered to talk and suggested they move to a quieter spot. What followed unfolded away from witnesses. Court records and witness statements described distinct roles during the confrontation. Testimony established that Pike took the lead. Shipp participated alongside her. Peterson maintained a position at the margins. Later courtroom testimony characterized Peterson's role as one of observation rather than direct engagement. She ultimately cooperated with prosecutors and accepted a plea in exchange for testimony. During the encounter, a physical attack occurred that left Colleen unable to continue. Official filings and trial transcripts document the sequence without graphic detail. The assault lasted a sustained period and resulted in injuries that proved fatal. Pike later admitted elements of what happened and told investigators the confrontation had been intended to scare Colleen. In interviews and court statements, she acknowledged the events and described them in chillingly matter-of-fact terms. After the incident, Pike returned to campus. The next day, other students observed behavior inconsistent with shock or remorse. Several classmates reported that Pike displayed an object she had taken from the scene. Those reports became part of the body of evidence investigators used. Campus personnel conducting routine grounds checks discovered the victim the following morning and contacted authorities, triggering a formal police response. Investigators secured the area and began a methodical evidence-gathering operation. Forensics teams processed the scene, cataloging physical items and documenting the setting. Interviews with students and staff produced descriptions of the group's movements that investigators matched against physical evidence. A critical item recovered from Pike's clothing linked her to the location and to the sequence of events described in witness accounts. Following that evidence and subsequent statements, law enforcement moved to detain those involved. Statements given to police, along with witness testimony collected at the Job Corps campus, formed the core of the prosecution's case. In court, prosecutors emphasized Pike's leadership role and the corroborating material evidence. Defense filings later centered on background, age, and mental health factors. Those points would form the basis of mitigation arguments in the years of appeals that followed. This chapter of the record concentrates on the actions and decisions of one night, who approached whom, how the meeting was framed, where it happened, who stood by, and what investigators later pieced together from interviews and physical evidence. The facts recorded at the time, witness accounts, statements, and chain of custody items shaped the charges that were filed and the legal path the case would take. Subscribe now, stay informed about how investigators build a case from scene to filing. Subscribe now, every update helps hold systems to account and keeps victims' voices present. If you won't subscribe, explain why in the comments. Your perspective will be part of the record. The morning after the campus routine, a groundskeeper made the discovery that shifted the case from missing person to homicide investigation. Officers arrived quickly and secured the area. Crime scene technicians began a systematic, methodical process: document, photograph, and collect. Every item, every footprint, every signature in a log was treated as potential evidence. Investigators immediately turned to the dormitory records. The sign-out sheet showed 4 names leaving together the night before and only 3 returning. That administrative detail became an operational lead. Detectives interviewed staff and students, compiling timelines and cross-checking statements against physical evidence. Forensics teams worked to establish sequence and connection. They processed the scene for trace materials and photographic records. Items recovered from the immediate area and items later located on campus were logged and entered into a chain of custody. Investigators cataloged statements that placed specific people at precise times and matched those statements to the physical record. Interviews with classmates produced repeated, consistent accounts, behavior the week before, conversations that had grown hostile, and remarks that, in retrospect, took on new meaning. Several students told officers that one of the group had shown an object and described the encounter in detail the morning after. Those independent reports were forwarded to the forensic team for correlation. A critical piece of evidence tied the scene to a member of the group. During a search of personal effects, officers recovered an item of interest in clothing belonging to one student. That item was logged, photographed, and submitted for forensic analysis. Analysts compared it to other materials and to statements given by witnesses. The presence of that item in a suspect's possession substantially narrowed investigative focus. Within roughly 36 hours, detectives had enough corroborated information to make arrests. Statements taken at the station, together with the collected evidence and the dormitory timeline, formed the basis for the initial charges. Investigators continued to gather reports, preserve physical items, and prepare detailed case files for prosecutors. Throughout the early investigation, law enforcement emphasized careful procedure, preserving evidence integrity, documenting witnesses under oath, and maintaining clear chain of custody records. Those steps were essential for later court submissions and for ensuring that the factual record remained intact as the case moved forward. If you want a step-by-step breakdown of how investigators turned scattered reports into a charged case, subscribe now. Subscribe now, we track every filing, every forensic report, and every court date so you don't miss the truth. If you won't subscribe, tell us in the comments why this level of accountability doesn't matter to you. Within roughly 36 hours of the discovery, law enforcement moved from investigation to custody. Detectives interviewed multiple students and staff, then executed targeted interviews and searches. During a search of personal effects, officers recovered a small, corroborating item that linked a member of the group to the location identified by witnesses. That recovery, together with consistent witness statements, gave investigators probable cause to make arrests. All 3 students who had been identified in the dormitory log were taken into custody and transported to the local precinct for processing. Standard procedure followed, each was advised of their rights, fingerprinted, and photographed. Investigators conducted recorded interviews. Statements given at that stage formed a key part of the early case file. One of the detained students made admissions that matched elements of witness testimony and the physical record. Those admissions, alongside the recovered item and multiple independent accounts from classmates, significantly narrowed the inquiry and informed charging decisions by the prosecutor's office. Authorities filed formal charges based on the evidence gathered. Counts included first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Because of the severity of the allegations and the weight of corroborating materials, prosecutors moved swiftly to pursue charges that reflected both direct participation and alleged planning. A critical prosecutorial decision concerned how to handle the third student who had been present. That student opted to cooperate with investigators. In exchange for testimony, prosecutors offered a plea arrangement. The cooperation reduced uncertainty around specific sequence and roles and became a central feature of the state's early case presentation. Law enforcement and prosecutors emphasized that the case progressed according to standard legal safeguards, evidence cataloged, statements recorded, and charging decisions grounded in corroborated material. The arrests and formal filings set the case on a path toward indictment, arraignment, and the formal court process. Subscribe now, follow every court filing and every motion so you're first to know what happens next. Subscribe now if you want plain facts and careful reporting on legal developments. Subscribe now. Every subscriber helps ensure thorough coverage of cases that matter. If you choose not to subscribe, explain in the comments why this level of scrutiny isn't worth your attention. Subscribe now, stay with us through the filings, hearings, and rulings ahead. The case against Christa Pike moved to trial in early 1996. Prosecutors presented a focused narrative that Pike planned the meeting, directed actions at the scene, and took decisive steps that led to a fatal outcome. The state's presentation relied on the dormitory sign-out, eyewitness accounts from classmates, the recovered physical item linked to Pike's clothing, and Pike's own statements to authorities. Prosecutors framed these facts to show leadership and intent. The defense pursued a different line. Attorneys emphasized Pike's troubled background, prior psychiatric treatment, and the psychological evidence their experts offered. They argued that a long history of instability, documented mental health concerns, and impaired impulse control should be central in weighing punishment. The defense asked jurors to view the events through the lens of mitigation rather than pure retribution. Witness testimony was decisive in front of the jury. Classmates and staff described the dynamics on campus, the interactions that preceded the confrontation, and how the group left the dormitory together that night. Investigators and forensic technicians explained the sequence they reconstructed from the physical record and interviews. The prosecution used those pieces to argue a consistent chain from planning to aftermath. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated. On March 22, 1996, the panel found Christa Pike guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. The verdict reflected the jury's assessment of the evidence, the credibility of witness testimony, and the weight of Pike's recorded statements. Sentencing followed shortly thereafter. On March 30, 1996, the court imposed the state's harshest penalty for the murder conviction and additional terms for related counts. The judge's ruling formalized a sentence that would set the course for decades of appeals and legal review. This phase of the record, the trial, the verdict, and the sentence established the legal facts that underpinned later challenges in public debate. It also set a clear division between the prosecutorial view of responsibility and the defense's mitigation narrative, a division that would drive appeals and comment for years to come. Subscribe now, follow the legal filings and expert analysis as this case continues to move through the courts. Subscribe now if you want clear, verified updates on verdicts, appeals, and procedural developments. If you choose not to subscribe, tell us in the comments why you'll opt out of following justice closely. After sentencing, the case entered decades of procedural review. Pike's legal team pressed multiple appeals and petitions, focusing on her age at the time of offense, documented mental health issues, and a traumatic childhood. Their filings argued that these factors warranted mercy or commutation and called attention to evolving legal standards about youth and culpability. A notable moment came in a federal appeals opinion where Judge Jane Stranch, while joining the court's judgment, wrote separately to question whether someone who was 18 at the time of an offense should face the death penalty, a point that would resurface in later litigation. In 2012, officials uncovered a separate controversy, an alleged escape plot. An outside correspondent, Donald Kowat, and a corrections officer, Justin Heflin, were arrested and charged after investigators determined a plan had been discussed to aid Pike's escape from custody. The plot was disrupted before it moved forward. Kowat was prosecuted and later sentenced, and Heflin lost his position. Investigators said the plan never reached an advanced operational stage, but the episode underscored the continued public and legal interest surrounding Pike's confinement. If you follow cases like this, subscribe now. Each subscriber helps us track filings the moment they happen. Subscribe now, be the first to know when courts issue new rulings that affect outcomes. Subscribe now. Your subscription keeps careful reporting alive for victims, families, and the public record. If you won't subscribe, tell us in the comments why you're stepping away from issues of public justice. Subscribe now, this matters, don't let it fade from attention. The case of Christa Pike remains more than a criminal record. It's a lasting question about youth, accountability, and justice. As her execution date approaches, the public grapples with what she represents, a young person shaped by trauma, or a threat who must face the ultimate punishment. Pike's life before the crime reflects systemic failures, her unstable home, her early psychiatric treatment, and the gaps in care that followed. Her legal challenges emphasize the thin line between accountability and mercy, particularly when mental health and developmental questions are central. At the same time, the outcome remains deeply personal to those who lost someone. Colleen Slemmer's death left a void. For her family, every court motion and appeal carries emotional weight, not just in the pursuit of justice, but in remembering who she was and what she planned for her life. There is a warning in this case, for policymakers and individuals. It underscores how environments matter, how youth support systems, mental health services, and rehabilitation initiatives can play critical roles in preventing tragic outcomes. It invites us to ask whether punishment alone is enough, or if society ought to do more to address trauma. If you believe this case should prompt real change, hit subscribe. Your voice can matter in holding systems accountable. Subscribe now to stay updated on how Pike's legal journey impacts broader conversations about justice. If you decide not to subscribe, tell us in the comments why you feel justice should not be observed so closely. Subscribe now. Every subscriber helps amplify ongoing coverage of this case and others like it. Subscribe now, remain aware, remain informed, and help others do the same. In the end, the story is not just about one crime. It's a mirror, reflecting how individuals and institutions respond when young lives are fractured, when trauma meets accountability, and when punishment stands at the edge of history.